Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. and we do this just for you. We're not doing it for anybody else. We look at life through a biblical lens. Tonight we're looking at the fall of Western civilization. And why is that so important? Well, it's important because the world owes Western civilization a tremendous debt of gratitude. But instead of praising all of this, the world keeps trying to destroy it. Well, who is it that's trying to destroy it? Well, communists, jihadist Muslims, progressive politicians, liberals, anarchists, and now religious leaders, financial leaders, educators, and more. What's their problem? Western civilization brought us a sound, strong, steady economy and made individuals, companies, and nations wealthy. Wealth means strength. Western civilization has provided a long-lasting, sound, solid social, political, religious, financial platform upon which many nations have been able to grow. And it has grown greater than any nation or people group known to mankind. What is the foundation of this social economic society? Well, in a word, it's called family. Add to that church. Add to that education, equal opportunity, the Protestant work ethic. And what has been the chief problem with Western society? The family, the church, education, equal opportunity, a Protestant work ethic. Are you confused? Then you have lived a much sheltered life. Only a handful of people, relatively speaking, have ever held to the Protestant work ethic globally and the objective standards of law and decency and so forth that it represents. But that small group has had the power for hundreds of years. But that power was eroded slowly over a 50-year period from the 1920s to the 1970s. A progressive president by the name of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a largely avoidable stock market crash, and a world war. Marxism teaches that catastrophes are good things. One of their tenets is never let one go to waste. Well, during this time period, we came off the gold standard. We created all sorts of government agencies to provide jobs. They had all these little three-letter words, WPA, and so forth. We instituted a tax on citizens' wages, which was against the Constitution. It is not constitutional. But they got around it through semantics. They don't call it a wage tax. They instituted a Social Security program, which is pure communism. In the 1930s, when this was being presented, Congress was against it. Do you know why Congress was against it? Because they understood the Bible. They understood the eschatological implications of a numbering system, and they refused to go along with it. See, the Bible talks about the end times when the man of sin, who ultimately shows himself to be the Antichrist, will set up a global financial system. And unless you have the number 666 tattooed on your forehead or on the back of your hand, you will not be able to buy or sell. And these people knew their Bible, and they said, we're not voting for it. And so a proviso was put into the bill that said, The Social Security number will never be used for identification purposes. How long did that last? Less than 20 years. Did anybody care? People lie in Congress. They agree to things they know they're not going to live up to. During this time period, we created a new educational model. Can you say John Dewey? John Dewey was a psychiatrist. He was tasked with coming up with a national educational program. By his own admission, out loud, he said he created in each classroom a psychological laboratory. We entered into a world war right after that. And all sorts of things get done during wartime that citizens would never accept in peacetime. By the mid-1960s, the children that were brought up under all this progressivism were in college, or they were college age, meaning draftable. Vietnam was cranking up. It was 63, 4, 5, 6. But it was cranking up due to deliberate manipulation from Washington. Korea was the first war managed from Washington. We never won that war. We are still at a stage, what do we call it? A condition of war in Korea. Vietnam would be the second, and it would be even more badly managed due to the players involved and the times. Young people, those whose parents had bought into the more liberal line, were in college students. Were in colleges as students. And they were doing drugs, and they were listening to what would become hard rock. The rock and roll of the 50s was rockabilly. It was more country. The rock and roll of the 1960s would bring us Woodstock. And Bob Dylan, Nobel laureate. The family was attacked in 1960, first by introducing birth control pills and ultimately abortion. By the early 70s, abortion moved from birth control to infanticide. It became legal to kill babies. Divorce became easier, eventually on demand. Moms went to work. Children were given over to grandma or to daycare. 40, 50 hours a week under the care, the tutelage, the discipleship of strangers. During the same time period, Russia declared the daycare program impossible. They said, we found that you cannot pay a woman enough to do what a mother will do for nothing. So how does decades of divorce help? Well, it doesn't. The issue of divorce over time helped erode religion. Studies show that people whose parents divorced when they were children are significantly more likely to grow up not to be religious as adults. 31% of them go to services every week, compared to 43% of religious people whose parents were married when they were growing up. And there's a lot of reasons. One is 29% negative teachings about gay and lesbian people. Folks don't want to hear that. Think you're being unfair. Turns them off. Now, you and I both know, we've talked about it before, I do not understand why there's a sermon preached in a Christian church against homosexuality. I do not understand that. I don't hear sermons being preached against murder. But somehow this comes up all the time. 19% of the reasons because clergy sexual abuse scandals. Are we seeing an uptick in these? Or has it always been like this and we just have a better news system? 60% because they simply do not believe what religion teaches. They did not grow up in a nuclear family. One researcher was not satisfied. He said the studies don't take into account how they were raised. And he said that his study found that divorce was a large part. Daniel Cox is his name, a researcher. He looked into those whys, and he says, I think there's also a structural component to this story that's gotten not near as much attention. He said, we wanted to focus on the way millennials were raised, which is different from any previous generation. Like fragmented, overstimulated, undermotivated, disjointed, both parents working, religious but lost. And part of that is the reality that they were more likely to have grown up with parents who were divorced. Andrew Root is a professor at Luther Seminary. He's written a book about spiritual consequences of divorce for children. He wasn't surprised to hear about the study's findings. He says everything in a divorce gets divided. Literally everything. Parents, friends get divided. Relatives are divided. Everybody takes sides. Even religion takes sides. The church gets divided. Dad leaves mom's faith, or vice versa. Negotiating those worlds for the child becomes difficult. So what do we have? We have spoiled children. Because parents are too busy. Because parents are guilt-ridden. They know what they're doing to these kids. Liberally indoctrinated children are the result because the school system is doing that and there isn't anything at home to counter it. The basic building block of society has been eroded and destroyed. That's the home, the family. Men are growing up without the patterning and tutelage of dads. Women are growing up without patterning and tutelage of women, moms. They don't know how to be a man. They don't know how to be a woman, a mom. Young adults are tuning in and dropping out. And during this time period, we had a Democratic president who was a ladies' man. His name was John F. Kennedy. Talk to people who were there. Followed by a president who was completely devoid of any sense of decency. His name was Lyndon Baines Johnson. He had a mouth that wouldn't quit. He didn't care about anybody. He would meet a woman in a social or even a business environment, and he'd be all over her, according to published reports. He once held a conference with his press secretary while he was sitting on the toilet. The man was so embarrassed and so disgusted he didn't know what to do. Followed by a president who would end up resigning because of illegal behavior and because of lying, a moral issue. Followed by a president who was completely inept and naive. Can you say Jimmy Carter? 20 years of immoral Democrats, 3 of them, and 1 immoral Republican. And another entire generation was born and grew up during that time period. A generation that knew nothing about basic American values, knew nothing of the Judeo-Christian ethic, or the Protestant work ethic, or the nuclear family. Concepts like respect, decency, honor, integrity, honesty were all words that the Boy Scouts used. But we didn't really know what they meant. People were focused on getting whatever it was they wanted by whatever means either necessary or available. It was 1970s and Western civilization was sick and dying. All that was left was the vestiges of an antiquated religion. And by the turn of the 20th century or 21st century, even that was gone. The contemporary church was born, all sight and sound and without a soul. This church has no fundamental creed, certainly nothing based on the Bible. This church has no purpose other than entertainment and keeping people believing they are somehow worshiping and or serving God. But the God they serve is self. And the point? If Western civilization had held strong, none of this would have happened. However, biblically, it had to. Humanly, it was inevitable. Why? Because it takes highly moral men and women to maintain a system that puts self at the bottom and others at the top. That's not natural to human beings. Well, why not? Well, because we're sinners by birth. If you had a human father and a human mother, you're tainted with a basic self-orientation. Even those who seem to be more outgoing and giving are basically sinners. Something called the Legatum Prosperity Index measures the top 10 most free countries in the world. The findings for 2015 was that the U.S. is the healthiest country in the world. Why? Well, because we are the only Western nation that doesn't have socialized health care. But it did not find the United States the top in any other area. We'll look at that next.